Ever wondered how the American dream of owning a home turned into a middle-class nightmare? In the year 2024, the housing market took a tumble that sent shockwaves throughout the country. Many were left questioning, how did it come to this? What were the circumstances that transformed the symbol of prosperity into a symbol of financial despair? These questions loom large in the minds of many middle-class homeowners. Stick around as we unravel the events leading up to this historic economic downturn. Our journey begins in the early 2020s, a time of economic prosperity and skyrocketing home prices. As the new decade dawned, the American dream of homeownership was not only alive but thriving. The economy was robust, employment rates were high, and the real estate market was on fire. Homes were not just places to live, but golden tickets to wealth. And the ticket price? It was inflating at a rate never seen before. The key drivers of this housing bubble were intriguingly simple: low interest rates, easy lending practices, and speculative buying. The Federal Reserve, aiming to stimulate the economy, kept interest rates at historic lows. This made borrowing money cheaper than ever. Banks, capitalizing on the opportunity, loosened their lending belts. And voila, money was flowing freely, and credit was easier to come by than a morning coffee. With such favorable lending conditions, the gates of homeownership swung wide open. First-time buyers, investors, speculators, the real estate market was a veritable buffet, and everyone wanted a piece. The frenzy was real. Homes were being bought and sold like hotcakes. The demand was high, the supply was low, and the prices? They were soaring. But here's the catch. Many of these purchases were speculative. People were buying homes not to live in but to profit from. The belief was that prices would keep rising, and the quick buy-sell strategy seemed like a surefire way to make a fast buck. The housing market had transformed into a speculative casino, and everyone was placing their bets. Yet, amidst this frenzy, a crucial reality was being overlooked. The housing market, like any market, functions on the basic principles of economics. And one of these principles is that prices can't rise indefinitely. There will always be a point of correction, a moment when the bubble bursts. But as we know, what goes up must come down. And the stage was set for an unprecedented downfall. A downfall that would shake the foundations of the middle-class American dream. But that, dear listeners, is a tale for the next scene. Stay tuned. Despite numerous warning signs, the bubble continued to inflate. In the grand theater of the housing market, a chorus of economists and market analysts were singing a warning tune. They were the cautious voices in the wilderness, pointing out the precariousness of the situation. They noted the unsustainable growth, the overvaluation of properties, and the risky lending practices that were becoming all too common. Yet their words fell on deaf ears. Their warnings dismissed as unnecessary pessimism by those who were riding the wave of prosperity. Investors, blinded by the glittering prospect of ever-increasing profits, chose to downplay the risks. They continued to pour money into the market, further inflating the bubble with their unchecked optimism. Homeowners too were caught in the euphoria of rising property values. Their homes, their castles were turning into golden geese, promising a future of financial security. The voices of caution were drowned out by the seductive whisper of wealth. The idea that their homes could dramatically lose value seemed far-fetched, even preposterous. Government agencies and regulatory bodies, those who were supposed to be the guardians of financial stability, also missed the red flags. They were too slow to react, too hesitant to pop the bubble. Their inaction, whether due to complacency or denial, was another factor that allowed the bubble to grow unchecked. The media, with its relentless focus on success stories and positive spin, also played its part. Reports of skyrocketing home prices and tales of overnight millionaires were the order of the day. The potential for a crash, the possibility of a significant correction, was conveniently ignored. Even the general public, lulled into a false sense of security by the booming market, failed to heed the warning signs. The dream of owning a home, of participating in the American dream, was too powerful, too enticing to resist. The fear of missing out, of being left behind in the race to prosperity, overrode any sense of caution. In retrospect, the writing was on the wall. The signs were there, clear as day, but they were ignored, dismissed as inconvenient truths in the heady rush of a booming market. And so the stage was set for the devastating crash of 2024. In 2024, the unthinkable happened. The housing bubble burst. The American dream of homeownership turned into a nightmarish reality for many. The events that led to this crash were like dominoes, neatly lined up, just waiting for a nudge to set them tumbling. First came the rise in mortgage defaults. For years, interest rates had been at historic lows, enticing many to buy homes they could barely afford. When those rates began to creep up, these homeowners found themselves trapped in a financial squeeze. They were stuck with monthly payments that were suddenly much higher than they had anticipated. As the pressure mounted, more and more people fell behind on their payments, triggering a wave of defaults that swept across the country. Next was the plummeting home prices. As defaults increased, a surplus of homes flooded the market. Supply outstripped demand, and prices began to drop. Homeowners watched in disbelief as the value of their biggest investment started to evaporate. Those who had bought at the peak of the market were hit the hardest. They found themselves owing more on their mortgages than their homes were worth. This phenomenon, known as being underwater, was a stark reality for millions of Americans. Then came the financial crisis. The rising defaults and falling home prices were a one-two punch that rocked the financial world. Banks, which had been happily lending during the boom years, suddenly found themselves with a glut of bad loans. To make matters worse, many of these loans had been bundled into complex financial products that were sold worldwide. As the value of these products plummeted, financial institutions around the globe found themselves in a precarious situation. The housing market, which had once been a source of economic strength, had become a ticking time bomb. When it exploded, the fallout was widespread and devastating. Banks and financial institutions collapsed. The stock market took a nosedive. The economy slipped into a deep recession. Unemployment rates soared as businesses shuttered and jobs evaporated. But the most heartbreaking impact was on everyday Americans. People who had worked hard, saved diligently, and dreamed of owning a home found themselves in a dire situation. Many were forced to foreclose, losing not only their homes but also their life savings. Others, who managed to hold on to their homes, were left with a mortgage that was much larger than the value of their property. In a matter of months, millions of Americans found themselves underwater on their mortgages. The American dream had turned into a middle-class nightmare. The housing crash of 2024 was a stark reminder of the risks inherent in an economy built on debt and speculation. It was a wake-up call to the nation, a painful lesson learned the hard way. But it was also a call to action, a call to reform and rebuild, a call to ensure that such a disaster never happens again. The fallout from the crash was nothing short of catastrophic. The magnitude of the damage done by the housing crash of 2024 was unprecedented, shaking the very foundations of the American middle-class dream. As the dust settled, a grim picture began to emerge. The housing market, once a beacon of prosperity and a testament to the American dream, lay in ruins. The once thriving neighborhoods that embodied the spirit of the middle class were now ghost towns. The crash had dealt a severe blow, with massive foreclosures sweeping the nation. Homes, once filled with the laughter of families and the promise of a bright future, now stood as empty monuments to a dream that had been shattered. The ripple effects of the crash were felt far and wide. The housing market, after all, was not an isolated entity. It was deeply intertwined with the broader economy. The wave of foreclosures led to a sharp decline in consumer spending. As people lost their homes, they tightened their belts, cutting back on non-essential expenses. The resulting drop in demand led to businesses shutting down, leading to even more job losses. It was a vicious cycle, a downward spiral that seemed to have no end in sight. The job market was hit particularly hard. Many of those who lost their jobs were middle-class Americans, people who had worked hard to build a life for themselves and their families. They found themselves in a precarious situation, unable to make ends meet. The dignity of work was replaced with the humiliation of unemployment. The stability of a regular paycheck was replaced with the uncertainty of not knowing where the next meal would come from. The impact on the broader economy was equally devastating. The housing crash of 2024 triggered a recession, a period of economic decline that lasted for several years. The GDP fell sharply, as did the stock market. Investors, both domestic and foreign, lost confidence in the American economy. The dollar weakened, and the United States lost its standing as the world's leading economic power. But perhaps the most heart-wrenching consequence of the crash was the human cost. Families were torn apart, dreams were shattered, and lives were changed forever. The middle class, once the backbone of the American economy, was now in tatters. The dream of owning a home, of building a life of comfort and security, had turned into a nightmare. The dream had been replaced with the harsh reality of economic hardship and uncertainty. The housing crash of 2024 was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the fragility of the American dream. It was a lesson in the dangers of unchecked speculation and the perils of ignoring warning signs. It was a testament to the fact that, in the end, the economy is about more than numbers and statistics. It's about people, their dreams, and their lives. The American dream had turned into a middle-class nightmare. Every crisis brings with it valuable lessons. As we look back on the housing crash of 2024, a few key lessons stand out. The first, and perhaps the most significant, is the importance of prudent lending practices. In the years leading up to the crash, lenders were all too eager to approve mortgages without properly assessing the borrower's ability to repay. This reckless lending fueled a housing bubble that was destined to burst, leaving countless middle-class Americans in financial ruin. It's clear now that we must return to a more cautious and responsible approach to lending. This means thoroughly vetting borrowers, ensuring they have stable income and a strong credit history, and discouraging them from taking on more debt than they can realistically handle. The second lesson is the danger of speculative buying. In the heady days before the crash, many saw real estate as a surefire way to get rich quick. They bought properties with the intention of flipping them for a profit, not realizing that they were inflating the bubble even further. When the market collapsed, these speculators were left holding properties worth far less than they had paid. Speculative buying is, at its core, a form of gambling. And like all forms of gambling, it carries substantial risks. The takeaway here is simple. Buy homes because you need a place to live, not because you're hoping to make a quick buck. The final lesson from the housing crash of 2024 is the need for better financial regulation. In the lead-up to the crash, regulators were asleep at the wheel, allowing dangerous practices to go unchecked. It's clear now that we need stronger oversight to prevent such a disaster from happening again. This means creating regulations that discourage reckless lending and speculative buying, and ensuring that these rules are enforced. It also means being vigilant, keeping a close eye on the market for any signs of another bubble forming. May we never forget the lessons of 2024. Forgetting could mean repeating the same mistakes and reliving this American nightmare, and that's a risk we simply cannot afford to take. In the span of just a few short years, the American housing market went from boom to bust. That's the nutshell of our story today, a tale of prosperity turned into hardship, of dreams transformed into nightmares. Let's retrace our steps, shall we? We started off with an era of growth and prosperity, where the American dream seemed within everyone's grasp. A house, a white picket fence, a slice of the pie. The bubble began to form, fueled by easy credit and soaring property values. The housing market was booming and everyone wanted a piece of the action. But as we know, all that glitters isn't gold. Behind the scenes, warning signs were being ignored. Economists and financial analysts sounded the alarm, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of the market. The bubble kept growing, its surface gleaming with promises of prosperity and growth. Then, the unthinkable happened. The bubble burst. In the blink of an eye, millions of Americans found themselves in a financial nightmare. Homeowners were plunged into debt, their homes worth less than their mortgages. The economy spiraled into recession, and the middle class bore the brunt of it. The aftermath was catastrophic. People lost their homes, their jobs, their savings. The dream of home ownership turned into a trap, a millstone around the necks of those who had aspired for a better life. The ripple effects were felt far and wide, affecting not just those directly involved in the housing market, but everyone who depended on a healthy economy. From this crisis, we learned hard lessons. We saw the dangers of unchecked greed, of ignoring warning signs, of living beyond our means. We learned that bubbles, no matter how shiny they may appear, will eventually burst. And when they do, the fallout can be devastating. But from the ashes of the housing crash, we also saw resilience. We saw communities come together, people helping each other, a nation picking up the pieces. It was a stark reminder that while markets may fluctuate, the human spirit remains steadfast. As we look back at this dark chapter in American economic history, we're reminded of the importance of vigilance, of listening to the experts, of not getting swept up in the frenzy of a booming market. We're reminded that the true value of a home isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the security, comfort, and happiness it brings. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the darkest chapters in American economic history. Let's hope that by remembering the past, we can avoid repeating the same mistakes in the future.